Good morning, everybody. And first of all, hats off for your endurance. I personally have no more than like 2 or 3 talks in me at a time before my butt and my brain go a little stir crazy, so you guys are awesome. I have a quick request. So I woke up this morning at sunrise in the mountains north of Boulder and hot-footed it down here to be with you guys. Got to zoom over Independence Pass, which is a place I used to guide mountaineering and backcountry trips, so it was wonderful to be back in these mountains again. And after lunch, I turn around and zoom back to Boulder for a commitment tonight. So with that, those are my cards on the table. So I'd like to ask you guys to ante up too. So can we do 2 things? First of all, can we all just stand up, shake it out, and then let's reach into our pockets. Because there was such excessive calorie burn to be here in co-located 3D reality in real time with each other, please take out your phones. Yes, go ahead. Come on, no sandbagging. I was watching the last couple of talks. Take out your phones, please go ahead and just power them down for 20 minutes. You can take a look at lunch. I promise the world will not have become even screwier in 20 minutes. Power them down, put them in your pockets, and let's be here together. All right, thank you so much. So what I'd love to do is, ideally, let's kind of do a refresher. Let's pop it up a level onto the balcony of all the topics we've been talking about during this event and many of the ones still to come. And the idea is, what is possible when we unlock the findings of neuroscience and neuropsychology, and we apply them to our personal lives and to our broader social, cultural, and political goals and challenges. So in a nutshell, this is the frame that I would set up, is that paradoxically, things in the world, material abundance, access to tools and technology, all of these things are at all-time highs. We live in an era of unparalleled abundance, and weirdly, paradoxically, we're unhappier than ever. We're suffering in larger, greater numbers than ever. What on earth is going on? And what I would like to advance and kind of float as a hypothesis for us to consider today is that part of the reason, not all, but part of the reason, is that we have been taking a purely and exclusively psychological approach to well-being, to happiness, to contentment, to engagement, to anxiety, to depression, to existential despair, to all of the human condition, and we've been taking it solely sort of behind the eyes and in our ego-based stories. When in reality, there are a lot more parts to our bodies and brains, and the way that our bodies and brains directly inform our hearts and minds. And if we can understand those connections better, we can have greater impact in 3 areas: healing, innovation, and connection. And those actually all cue off the neuroscience that we're going to talk about today. So are we good? We locked and loaded to jump into the story? Yeah. All right. So raise your hand if you read, heard of, came across, saw somebody else talking about this book within the last couple of years. Yeah, Hillbilly Elegy. It was written by J.D. Vance. He's a very interesting fellow. He grew up in the backwoods Appalachia of rural Ohio. We've got the classic kind of overlooked town, opioid addictions, lots of dysfunctions. His ticket out was to join the Marine Corps. From the Marine Corps, he parlayed that into entry into Yale Law. And then he wrote this book. And he wrote that the timing of it was propitious. It was right around the last 24 months. So just as the world lurched off its axis in 2016, and a whole bunch of people said, what on earth is going on? Vance came out with this book, and he tried to explain what is happening and what is it like in the flyover states, in the overlooked and forgotten places in America. And this came out of Princeton a couple of years ago, which was basically saying that if you are a white male with less than a college degree over the age of 40, your incidences of mortality are skyrocketing. And interestingly, an even higher uptick for women in the same demographic, but still lower overall numbers. So that's shocking. For the first time in generations, children are having lower prospects This is the sort of truncation or perversion of the American dream that parents strive and struggle, they pass the football to their kids, the kids take it another few yards downfield, and life keeps getting better. And we're actually witnessing a turning point. This is happening broadly around the world as well. The World Health Organization has done a study just in the last 2 years and has found that around the world, suicide and depression rates are skyrocketing. And they are happening, if you see those dark red areas on this map, they are happening in areas of low economic development, poor social and political stability, basically in the places where, you take a look at this, 75% of suicides are taking place in low and middle income countries. And just take a look at that bottom right-hand corner, that annually, more of us around the world choose to take our own lives at this point than war and all natural disasters combined. Just think about that for a moment. We are born into the 21st century with peace and prosperity. There's no saber-toothed tigers. There's no Attila the Huns. There's no black plagues, or at least not right now. Fingers crossed. And we have become our own worst enemies. More humans choose to step off the mortal coil every year than war, famine, flood, earthquake, forest fires combined. That's shocking. So this is the weird world we live in. We have supercomputers in our pockets. We have air conditioning. We have Chilean grapes in February at Whole Foods. And giant, amazing 4D. By the way, sidebar, are you guys a little bummed by high-resolution widescreen TV? Because they turn all your favorite movies into what looks like 80s VHS soap operas. Like, they've completely, like, the contrast is gone. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's it. So far, we could say, okay, there's a big global mental health epidemic. It's directly affecting the downtrodden, the overlooked, the people having the hardest time keeping up with the bus of this wild-ass, globally connected society. But this sign right here, right, you can read it. It's a railroad crossing sign. But it's actually affixed to a telephone pole in a town many of you know, Palo Alto. And in the last 10 years, there has been an epidemic in Palo Alto High School and other related high schools in the region of some of their best and brightest kids. So this is not Appalachia. This is not red state flyovers. These are the parents of PhDs. These are the dual income tech industry titans. And they've had to hire private security guards to guard the railroad tracks 24/7, so no more of Palo Alto's finest children don't choose to walk in front of those trains. So that really drives it home. This is not just social justice, right? Although vital and necessary. This is not just global distribution of wealth and access. This is right here in the cradle of innovation with our best and brightest. So we might have heard a lot about diseases of despair in this last few years. The idea that folks are just literally overwhelmed and suffering in greater numbers than ever. But what if we got it wrong? What if these aren't diseases at all? What if they're symptoms? What if all of these things we're seeing are symptoms of something even bigger and more pernicious? And what I would propose to you, and back to that big idea in the beginning where we kind of teed this up, is that we are potentially overloading our nervous systems. So if you look at this good old-fashioned 40s era radio, right? Anthropologists have a term for societies. They classify societies as monophasic or polyphasic societies. And that just means one channel or many channels to consciousness. What are accepted ways for people to have awareness, interact with information? So many indigenous cultures, for instance, would be polyphasic. They would have dreams, visions, trances, premonitions, meditation, shamanic states, a whole bunch of things, and they were integrated and valid. So if you came downstairs and said, in Chiapas, and you said, Abuela, I just had a dream of grandfather, Abuela would not say, oh, that's just a Freudian projection of your unconscious, shut up and eat your Wheaties and get to the school bus. She'd say, oh, what did grandfather have to say? Right? Tibetan lamas who go into trance become the oracles. They bring through information that is considered valid and essential. Well, we, surprise, surprise, ended up with a monophasic culture. And that happened way back when, French Enlightenment, the idea of good old-fashioned straight-up empirical rationalism, and what I can touch, taste, see, feel, measure is real. And we ended up with a singular mode of consciousness, which is predominantly waking state, rational, binary consciousness. And it has very specific neurological correlates. You can track it, you can measure it. It gave us all sorts of awesome things. It gave us the scientific revolution. It gave us civil society. It gave us civil rights. It helped us articulate free markets. It did a wonder of things. But what it robbed us of is range and versatility in our neuropsychology. And what happened is that dial, which used to roll up and down the knob so freely for millions of years of human evolution and culture, got rusted shut. And so now we're in a situation where we are running good old AOL modem at the time where the world has just gone to quantum fiber optic. A couple of years ago, Eric Schmidt made the point, it's kind of mind-blowing. He said, up until 2007, for all of human history, all of the bits of information that were ever shared are now getting duplicated every 2 years. So all of human history, including cavemen, to 2007, now every 24 months. If you read the New York Times Sunday edition tomorrow morning, in that one leisurely hour and a half or so, with a cup of coffee, you will have consumed more information than a medieval monk did in their lifetimes. So what we are looking at is literally a situation where we are all experiencing chronic micro-PTSD. We are getting stimulated and triggered, and we do not have the resources to integrate this in meaningful, healthy, sustainable ways. So last year, Stephen Kotler and I came out with this book, Stealing Fire, and it was an assessment of exactly this issue from the other side of the fence, because we thought, okay, that's the public health case, right? That's where we can know, hey, it's global, it's pernicious, it's pervasive, and obviously there's a strong need to go out and do something about this. We came at it from the exact opposite side. We're like, well, really, those are public health stats. NGOs, they tend to have a specific filter. If this is really real, really the kind of crisis we think it might be, it should show up in the marketplace as well. There should actually be an economic signature to this problem. So we actually began a 6-month research project with a team of economists to try and track what we call... Is it possible if I can get it? Can I get a backup up here? That would be great, thanks. So we tracked the altered states economy, which was basically all the time and money that we collectively spend just trying to change that rusted knob on the dial, just trying to go from monophasic, I'm stuck in my head and I cannot get out and it's killing me, into polyphasic. And we considered the categories that would make sense. Any pursuit or behavior that literally provides a shift in consciousness from waking state, 21st century normal, tired, wired, stressed, probably a little neurotic, into something where I step outside myself and I experience some degree of relief. We looked at the usual suspects, drugs and pharmaceuticals, both licit and illicit. We looked at media, social media, streaming pornography, IMAX theaters, anything that the primary reason for doing it is to lose myself, even if for a moment. We looked at personal growth, ranging from formalized therapy to the entire multi-billion-dollar self-help industry. And we looked at recreation, where you're not playing for points, you're not playing for trophies, you're playing for the delight and loss. Well, we tallied it all up, and we ended up with a number that was mind-boggling. In fact, it was so ridiculous, I made our economists recalculate it 4 different times before we went to press, because it's $4 trillion. That's a quarter of the US GDP. $4 trillion. A 15-year dual-front war in Afghanistan and Iraq, to put this in perspective, the entire tab for that sucker is $5 trillion. We're spending $4 trillion every year just to get out of our heads. Now, not all of it's productive. A lot of it's distractive, addictive, destructive. But the fact that we spend that much consistently can underscore how essential a need this is. Because what we found in our studies, and we were trying to kind of create a model that's useful, like what are those non-ordinary states? What do people value when they try and change that channel? Where are they trying to get to? And what we found was there's 4 consistent features: selflessness, timelessness, effortlessness, and richness. And they show up across meditation, across flow states, across psychedelic states, across sexual states, across movement and dance, across action sports, across a whole host of doorways in. The places people can continually get to represent these 4 things. Selflessness just means that inner critic in my head has finally gone quiet. And whether I'm doing CrossFit or I'm an endurance runner or whatever, like just the ability to not have that nag. The timelessness means I'm no longer running away from painful past or running towards fearful futures. I'm not on my phone and my planner. I'm just here, as Eckhart Tolle famously said, right? And Ram Dass before him. But to be in this present moment, priceless. The effortlessness is endless motivation, joy and delight for doing the thing we're here to do. And the richness is actually access to information, pattern recognition, and decision making I don't normally have. So that's the why behind the $4 trillion. Now, as we were doing this research, we tracked all the data. What's happening in neuroscience, what's happening in psychology, what's happening in occupational therapy, rehabilitative stuff, and we found ourselves accidentally creating a Rosetta Stone. If you guys remember the original Rosetta Stone, it was like the time of Napoleon. They went to Egypt. They were trying to figure out what all the hieroglyphics were, and they found this one stone, and it was written in Greek, Demotic Greek, and Egyptian hieroglyphs. And because they had all 3, they could figure out exactly what the sentences meant, and they unlocked, thousands of years of Egyptian communication. Well, in some small way, we found a bit of a Rosetta Stone for optimal human flourishing and well-being. Now, for the technicians in the audience, I want to caution you guys, this is a 2-dimensional approximation of multivariable complex human stuff. So these relationships are not one-to-one, they're not locked, but this is just a general gestalt to take a look at, which is, in a nutshell, 21st century wired, what we talked about, tired, wired, stressed. That's the left-hand side with the red circle. That's what you're looking at. You're looking at a lot of cortisol, a lot of norepinephrine, a lot of high beta wave activity, a lot of prefrontal cortical activity. Quite often, for many of us, especially desk-bound and sitting and all these things, we have crummy posture. Our shoulders roll forward. Our lungs collapse. The bottom third of our lungs are usually pooled CO2. We have poor air exchange and poor oxygen saturation. Our cardiac rhythm, right, is typically erratic with very poor cardiac coherence. There's this predictable stack, and this is where most of us live most of the time. But if you look on the right-hand side with the yellow circle, that's where things tend to get consistently interesting. And again, remember, the dial is not that we're not trying to change one fixed location on the dial for a different fixed location on the dial. We're looking for range. And by gaining access to different neuroelectrical states, alpha and theta, many of you are aware of those from meditative practices. Again, flow states correlate in these zones. Deactivating our prefrontal cortex tends to give us relief and tends to give us access to other areas of our brain connecting, communicating, and making sense for us. All of these things build out to and lead up to basically paint by numbers consciousness design, which is kind of radical when you think about it, and really exciting as far as the possibilities and the premises it gives us access to. So when you throw that in gear, this is a version of what this looks like, and this is based on Herbert Benson's work at Harvard, and then built on with some of our research with RedBull and a lot of their elite athletes. But when you take a look at this, if you take it, in fact, I don't think I have a pointery thing, but if you look at the section that says struggle, that's where this cycle starts. Meaning, like life, any experience starts with overload, starts with more challenge than we can handle. That's where we are in 21st century normal. High beta activity, stress response, potential vigilance, and we're trying to deal with something we haven't solved for. Now, either we get super stressed there and we collapse, Or, if we're really fortunate, we end up in a release phase. And that's where nitric oxide, neurotransmitter, flushes through our system. It flushes out and down regulates our stress response, and it helps communicate and bring in a lot of relaxation and well-being neurochemicals. Our brain waves tend to slow down a notch. We start becoming less forcing the feel and more sort of feeling the force. We're allowing ourselves to kind of go with something. That could be frustration, it could be fatigue, it could be a whole host of things, but that's what it does. Then we actually end up in a flow state or a non-ordinary state. And that's a situation where our brain waves go from alpha, potentially even all the way down into theta. Most of us only experience theta when we're in sort of drifting off to sleep. It's called a hypnagogic state, right? Where you kind of jerk awake and you suddenly find yourself having a weird dream even though you thought you were still awake. But that's a place of amplified pattern recognition, super enhanced connections, and very interesting access to novel ideas. And that's where you also get feel-good hormones, dopamine, endorphins, anandamide. And you end up in a very resourced state. And then finally, you end up in a recovery stage. And that recovery stage is hinged on what we were just talking about this morning, deep delta wave sleep. And then we can begin this all again. Now think about it. What we've learned is that people who are in trauma can go through this cycle and they can come back to zero, they can come back to homeostasis in their nervous systems. And that if you give humans, and I am a terrible offender at this. I leave my laptop open for a week at a time, and I end up with 30 tabs across my browser, and then at some point I'm trying to get on a Skype or a Zoom and my video won't work, and I'm like, what's going on? It's like, oh, I've had way too many tabs open for too long on my computer. What do? Right? You hit the power button, right? You shut it down and you boot it back up. And most of the time that helps. And that's what we're finding is an incredible antidote to this information overwhelm, to the idea that we're trying to perceive a world that's in broadband, just running little modems. And the interesting thing, the thing that I think potentially connects us all here today, why we're in this room, why this event exists, is that we are in the last decade, and you could say the last 5 years, but certainly recently and increasingly, we are experiencing ways to unlock this knowledge because of the intersection of these four forces. And these four forces, psychology, technology, pharmacology, and neurobiology, advancements in each of these fields are now overlapping. We're getting insights into how to address the human condition by how these things cross-pollinate. So for an example, is Imperial College, who we're actually doing a partnership with, doing research. We're actually comparing the neurophysiology of a flow state to their MDMA and trauma work. Because they were able to put substances like MDMA and psilocybin into a participant and then put them in an fMRI machine, they weren't just learning more about the substance, they were learning more about the nature of mind because they could end up with highly accurate readouts and data and imaging. That's a fascinating thing. That's where we're having an understanding of human psychology because we have better access to neurobiology and pharmacology. Alternately, there's technoceuticals like electrical impulses to tune people's vagal nerves, which can decrease stress, inflammation, a whole host of things. And that's actually a little magnetic, almost like a little magnetic pacemaker meets garage door opener that people are putting here. And suddenly technology is intersecting with neurobiology and completely changing our psychology. So with that, the doors are open. We have the Rosetta Stone. And what it's allowing us to do is realize that we don't have to face this human condition without tools. And that the next breakthrough technique, technology, pill, practice actually lives within an even bigger map, that Rosetta Stone. The idea that we can heal ourselves and each other, that we can access innovation and we can enhance collaboration by tuning the knobs and levers of our bodies and brains is potentially what I hope is our best shot at the future. And I'll leave you with this one, which is both Wes Jackson, who's fantastic, and his quote I think speaks for itself here. But there's another one from the Talmud which says, We are not expected to finish this work, nor are we excused from it. Thank you very much.